Over the testing integration with test clocks documentation. So overview, we are going to basically go through how to use the test clocks, creating them and setting their time, setting up the simulation, advancing the simulated time, monitoring and handling changes, updating the simulation, deleting the clock, and using the cases. The test mode allows us to have a test clock and simulate its forward motion and check out, billing resources and subscriptions and how they change their state and trigger the webhook events so that we can test our payment failures and things for quarterly or annual renewals or upgrading and changing plans in the middle of the cycle, or ensuring the integration processes the webhooks correctly and validating that the trials and trial periods are handled correctly, building and testing the multi-phase subscription schedules as well. So the way we use them is 3 steps. The first step is to create the simulation to set it up. The second step is to advance the actual test clock, and the third step is to review the test objects and events in the dashboard, as you can see in these three screenshots here. So let's go ahead and start with the first step of creating a clock and setting its time. There's 2 ways to do this, through the dashboard or through the API. Now, I like doing things through the API, so the way we're going to do it through the API is, in the case of Node here, you can see we simply have our Stripe API key, and we have our Stripe object, and we await the test helpers test clocks create method, which allows us to pass in a frozen time and give the clock a name. And that's all we need to do to create the test clock using the API. Now, if you wanted to go through the dashboard, you can go under subscriptions, billing, click the little test clocks link in the banner, create a new simulation, and in the modal you can enter the name for the simulation and set the frozen time for the clock. So if you implement it through the API, obviously you can skip the going to the dashboard and clicking around and all of that, and also every time you need to set up another test clock, you simply can just update the time and name from within your code instead of going all over the place. So that's kind of why I like to go the API route. Now, setting up your simulation is the next step. And once again, if we are going down the API route here, you can see that on the server side, we are going to again have our Stripe objects, and this time we're going to create a customers object. And this customer object will contain the customer's email, the test clock that we have set up before, the one that we created before, the payment method, and the invoice settings for this customer that we want to test with. So that's on the server side. We set up that customer. Again, on the server side, we also set up our subscription or anything that we're trying to test. So in this case here, we can say Stripe subscriptions create, and then pass in our customer ID and the items that he's subscribed to. So this is essentially the process of setting up using the API our simulation. Once again, you can also set up your customer and subscription from the dashboard, and there's a bunch of steps to kind of go through. Okay, add a subscription, actions, create, and this could change depending on the UI, so you may want to read through the steps on the dashboard creation of the customer and subscription when you need to do that. The little orange icon indicates that an object is associated with a clock in your dashboard if you're viewing the results in your dashboard. Now, to advance the simulated time, we can again use the API. And what we're going to do is, again, we're going to call our Stripe test helpers test clocks method. And instead of creating, this time we are going to do advance. pass in our clock ID and our frozen time. And that will give us the updated or the test clock object back as the return value. And the time would have advanced on that particular test clock. So for example, if we were testing a renewal for the subscription after a year, we can advance the test clock and try to see if our webhooks or other objects like we talked about, or the failure cases, happen correctly once we advance time. Now on to monitoring and handling changes. So after we have successfully made some sort of an API or dashboard operation, the clock takes a few seconds to advance to the specified time. And when the clock has changed that state, you can use webhooks to listen for the event notifications or poll the clock. The dashboard also reflects these changes, and for example, you can go to the invoices page on the dashboard and check whether the invoice was created or paid for your subscription. If you use webhooks, listen to the following event notifications, which are basically the test helpers test clock advancing or test helpers test clock ready. So when it's advancing, it's kind of in motion, right? It takes those few seconds to move forward. And when it's ready, it has completed the advancing. And if before production, make sure the integration correctly handles the other billing specific event notifications in addition to these events. Right. So here we can see what we would want to do to poll the state of the clock and retrieve it by ID to examine its status. So basically, again, very simple. We're going to take the await the Stripe test helpers test clocks and retrieve and just pass in the clock ID. We can get the test clock that way, and then we can look at the status of the test clock once we get the clock. Now to update the simulation, we can continue to make changes to our simulation and advance the clock. For simulations like adding a customer balance, making mid-cycle upgrades, adding one-off invoice items, and after each update we can monitor the changes again and repeat as many times as we need to satisfy the test case. So monitoring changes means, what we just went over in terms of checking if the clock is advancing already and looking at the various events. So we retrieved it. All right. And finally, to delete the clock is again very simple. Just use the API and do Stripe test helpers test clocks.del for delete. Personally don't like when people do this. Like I would have just spelled it out as delete. It's less confusing that way. But anyway, clock ID, that's what the Stripe devs chose to do. Dashboard. You can also go over to the test clock page once again and find the simulation and hit finish in the modal. Okay, so the next thing is the use cases. So a use case could be a test subscription renewal. Another use case could be the testing mid-cycle upgrades with prorations. And another use case can be testing trials. Okay, and so these are the three use cases that are covered on this particular page. So to test the renewal, we would create the clock, set up the simulation, advance the time, monitor, handle change, and update the simulation, the steps we've spoken about before. So here what we're going to do is we're going to create a test clock, set the frozen time to January 1st, for example, add a customer and add a payment method for the customer. And after adding the payment method for the customer, we are going to create the subscription for the new customer and set it at $50 a month. In doing so, the invoice of $50 a month is paid automatically and the subscription is active. Now we advance the date in the test clock to February 1st to see that the invoice of $50 is created, and by default the invoice appears in a draft state for an hour. So we can learn more about subscription invoices. I think, is that on this page or a different page? Let's find out. Okay, so that's under subscriptions and it's on a different page. So right now we're not going to go back over that, but we can learn about that in a different video. Advancing the time by 1 hour to see that the invoice is finalized and paid automatically. I see. Okay, so basically what we're doing here to test a subscription is we're going to advance to January 1st. We're going to create the customer and subscription. We're going to start charging the $50 and have it be active. We're going to advance to February 1st, and the invoice should get created, and then it should be paid automatically after an hour. So we can again test that by advancing the clock another hour. Now, for testing the mid-cycle upgrades and prorations, again, it's the same 5 steps. What we're doing here is to see if, let's say we have 2 products and one is $50 a month and the other is $100 a month, basic and premium. And we want to test the prorations for a customer who upgrades their basic to premium in the middle of a billing cycle. So what are we going to do? So we are going to again start the test clock from January 1st, add the payment method to the customer, create the subscription for the basic plan at $50 a month, and we can see that the $50 gets invoices created, finalized, paid, and then advance the date by 2 weeks, let's say to January 16th, and then upgrade the subscription to a premium plan. And you can use pending updates with the update subscription, create subscription item, and update subscription item calls. So when you make the update, set the payment behavior pending if incomplete. And so here we are basically updating our subscription, as you can see in the code here. So we're doing Stripe subscriptions retrieve, and then we are updating that particular subscription using that subscription ID. And in the items, we're adding subscription items, data ID, things like this. So after upgrading the subscription, the webhook event gets created for subscription updated. Pending invoice items are also created for the prorations. You'll see a negative proration of -25 for the unused time of the basic plan and a positive proration of 50 for the used premium plan. So basically we're saying from Jan 1st to Jan 15th, the person used up half of the money from the $50, which is 25, and then the premium was 100, but he's going to use that only for the second half of the month. So the total should be $75, right? 25 for the half of the first and half of the second. The way they're doing this in this case is to say that we are charging $50 up front for the month and then subtracting 25 back, right? So we are basically getting 25 and then adding on the 50. So advancing the date, and then on Feb 1st, we will see that the subscription has cycled and an invoice has been generated and incorporated, including the negative proration, the positive proration, and the total payment for the month of February, resulting in $125 US. Now, I thought it should be 175 because now the February should be on the new premium plan, right? This person would have used 25 in January first half, $50 worth in the second half, and another 100 for the February. So I'm not sure if this is a mistake in the description here, but there's not much more I can do to clarify here if this should have been 175. But you should check this for your billing use case. To finalize the invoice, you advance the time by an hour to get the payment as before. Now the test trial case, first follow these steps to start using the test clock. Once again, the same 5 steps. And again, we're going to create the frozen time in January 1st, add a customer and include their payment method, and we are going to create a subscription and add a 7-day trial period in our subscription. So basically we're now testing the trial period, right? So we're creating this subscription create with a time to end the trial period. And then after creating the subscription with a 7-day free trial period, a subscription is created in the trialing state. And so you can check that, once you advance the clock, the system should end the trial and move out of the trialing state, create the event notification for customer subscription trial will end a couple of days before the trial ends. And then you can advance the date to after the trial ends. And so the subscription then becomes paid and the invoice is created. And then you can advance the date by a cycle, for example, to February 8th for the monthly subscription, and then move it up by an hour to make sure that the subscription is actually paid like before. So these were the 3 use cases we went over. The use case for checking subscription renewals, the use case for trials, and the use case for upgrading your subscription plans in the middle of the cycle. So these are 3 cases that we can look at with test clocks. And that is all that is there on this page under test clocks with Stripe. So that will be it for this video. I hope to see you in another video.